Come on, you sissy, be a man. Don't cry. Grow some muscle, you puny wimp. Real men are ripped. Kick his ass. What? You ate a salad? Fucking rabbit food. Real men eat meat, and only meat, cooked over a fire on a stick. You want that woman? Fucking fuck her. What? She said no? So what? Inside every no is a yes waiting to come out. You just gotta get it out of her by getting it in her. Know what I mean? We all know what toxic masculinity is. Or do we? Why is it suddenly a thing the media is obsessed with? And is it really a new phenomenon at all? Where does it come from? Is it simply an inherent aspect of being a male? How is it taught? How is it reinforced? How is it represented in the stories we read and watch? How do we diffuse it? What is the antidote? Join me and my intrepid co-host, Jenn Zuko, as well as some other guests, as we embark on another semi-drunken exploration of the intersection of literature and society as we discuss problematic, toxic masculinity tropes. So before we get into problematic toxic masculinity trope number 1, go big or go home, we wanted to...
I have two disclaimers.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we wanted to first discuss what we mean by toxic masculinity, what it is and is not. And as I was doing my little research, I found an old book from grad school days called My Enemy, My Love by Judith Levine.
Oh, I've heard of it.
And the original subtitle was Man-Hating and Ambivalence in Women's Lives.
Whoa!
And then they changed the subtitle for the 2013 edition.
Yeah.
But it had some interesting stuff in it that I thought that could tie in really well with some of these tropes, especially since we're going to have a brief discussion, which, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, just like the badass female tropes, this series is about gender and power and the damaging things that happen when we have problems with that in our culture. So that's kind of they're not the same as the badass female tropes, but they're certainly linked, and we're talking about a similar sort of thing, which is gender and power and the damage that it does. But as far as the phrase toxic masculinity, that is one of my 2 disclaimers, actually.
Yes.
Thank you for that segue. So, I mean, okay, look, it's 2019. If you're not an angry feminist, I don't even know what you're doing.
Right.
So that's just, yes, good, true. But a lot of particularly pissed off feminists who want to, get things changed are using this phrase toxic masculinity to stop conversations, or they use that phrase to equate to all masculinity. And I want to make sure, I want to reiterate, well, I'm iterating it now, but I'm going to be reiterating it all the time throughout all of our talks, that toxic masculinity does not mean masculinity. Toxic masculinity is not, I mean, hashtag not all men. I know it's kind of a joke, but it's true though.
Right.
Men are not intrinsically toxic. Men are not the problem here. The problem here is patriarchy, particularly like imperialist, capitalist patriarchy, heteronormative crap and all that stuff. It's not the men. It's when the men choose to do toxic behaviors, or when they make toxic choices. I am not equating. I am a pissed off feminist. Like I said, all of you should be too. Right. But I'm not equating men with toxic masculinity. Masculinity is not toxic by itself. Right. So I just want to say that. I'm going to say it way too many times, and your listeners are going to get really sick of it, but I don't care, because I'm very, very adamant about that. Right. And the second thing is another disclaimer, which is kind of the same as the problematic badass female tropes, but those are a lot harder to spot. With these, I just want to make sure that everyone knows I'm not bringing these up and naming them and pinpointing them because I want everyone to now start hating the things that they used to love. Right. That's not the point of this either. The point is that because they are toxic masculinity and because they are tropes, and the definition of a trope is it's repeated over and over and over and over and over.
Right.
I just want people to be without question. Right. I always want people to question it, to be aware, so that they're not blindly taking in all of this toxic masculinity. So that at least, I mean, look, I am a huge James Bond fan, giant. We'll talk about that on number 3. But I know what it is that I'm consuming. And if you blindly consume these tropes, and they are tropes, they repeat themselves, it means that you start to, particularly boys trying to emulate what they think a man should be based on what they see in culture, they start to emulate problems. So at least if you can go into a James Bond movie and go, okay, this is really fun. Right. And I get it, and I'm not going to emulate that because I shouldn't.
Right.
So that's my second disclaimer. A, toxic masculinity does not equal men. And to still love the things. Right. Right. Just pay attention, like Dr. Bell said in the other podcast I was on.
And for my own thing, was what I wanted to kind of draw the distinction, because, I read a number of articles, I think, that you sent me or that I found through, that are kind of related to it. And one of the things that I have also noticed just in my own interactions with some angry feminists who decided to be angry at me.
Well, especially if you're a straight white cis male. I mean,
for things that I legitimately did wrong. But there seems to be a tendency to take that term toxic masculinity and use it the same way and apply it in the same fashion that they do the term misogyny. To equate it with and to treat them as interchangeable terms. And they're not really.
No, they're not.
They're not, because misogyny is purely an outward directed malady.
Yeah, it's hatred towards women, that's only one.
Right. And that was one of the first questions
it manifests a couple ways, but it's not. Right. Right.
And that was one of my questions that I wrote down first off was, what is toxic masculinity? Is it monodirectional and external only, or is it bidirectional, both external and internal? And toxic masculinity is usually brought on by a little white kitten.
Oh, hi, white kitten.
But it's bidirectional because, like our problematic female tropes, but maybe even more so, toxic masculinity is also a form of self-abuse. These are things directed that men direct at themselves as much as they direct outward at women.
Yeah, and it depends on the trope. Like, and patriarchy, like I've been saying in these articles so far, patriarchy damages men too. Oh, exactly. And unfortunately, in Hollywood, we only have binary gender. We don't really have a whole lot of like non-binary. But yeah, no, it damages men too, and it's this kind of patriarchy that makes men make these choices for all kinds of reasons. Why do they make toxic choices? Well, they've been bullied, or they have trauma, or they suffer that intense pressure that all humans do, which is to belong. And the things that happen to you psychologically when you are outcast are actually quite serious. It's this intrinsic nature. We are half a tribal species, and we have to belong. If we don't, then we make major problems. And if men are being told, hey, go big or go home. Hey, you're too skinny. Or I was just having a conversation today with a friend who was like, I know I'm not really straight, but I'm definitely not gay, but I'm definitely not completely straight. I'm like, well, maybe you're bi. I'm bi. He's like, yeah, it's just too much trouble to try and figure that out. I was like, oh, I'm like, why is it too much trouble? He's like, because it's really not socially acceptable. Yeah, so this poor guy is like, I'm probably bisexual. No one's going to allow me to figure that out or explore that because, and like I was commenting to him, I was like, yeah, well, it is a lot more in this heterosexual male patriarchy society. It's way socially acceptable for women to be gay, right? Because that's hot.
Right.
But
only if you're a certain type of woman.
Well,
right?
Sure, yeah, if you're pretty, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's
it's traditionally pretty. But, for a guy to want dick, that's like a big problem still in 2019. So this poor guy is like, he has this whole part of his sexuality that he's just not bothering to own, because like he said, it's like the pressure and the bullying is way too extreme. So I find that horrible, and that's something that he is damaging himself doing that, and it's society damaging him too. Yeah, it's not just himself. Obviously, he'd be making other choices if he were allowed to. But anyway, so that's where these toxic masculinity tropes come in, and I named them that because I didn't really have another good, I don't know, phrase in English to use for it, and it kind of matches the problematic badass female tropes too, sort of. So that's why.
And before we get to go big or go home directly, I mean, this is kind of the start of it. I wanted to have also kind of a discussion about this idea to kind of, because essentially these tropes, both the problematic badass female tropes and these problematic toxic masculinity tropes, these are tied to fictional representations. That's what we're looking at, is the representation of manhood inside media.
Yes, exactly. In culture, entertainment, arts, because culture reflects our art and vice versa. But we're talking about the tropes we're talking about are actually tropes in things that are created. Right.
But one of the things I got to thinking about as I was doing some reading on this one, and this may have been the mistake that I made, was doing a lot of reading before we did this.
Is that ever a mistake?
Well, maybe for me, because what I ended up wanting to kind of talk about before we get to, focusing on the tropes and the media is this thought that I had. Because when it comes to the problematic badass female tropes, what is the solution? What's the remedy to that? Well, it's more women writing movies, more women directing movies, more women producing movies. It's giving that voice, and you will find that those tropes get erased and diminished because you have that the woman's voice being elevated and taking control of those stories where they've been diminished, and they can redirect those.
Yeah, they can at least improve, if not completely go away.
So, but when we get into talking about toxic masculinity tropes, when we get into talking about toxic masculinity, because of the structure of patriarchy, what is the solution? What is the remedy for...
Down with the patriarchy.
But, and that is true. I agree.
Right, Heather?
Down with the patriarchy. But
how do you do that?
That's for the betterment of us all, for everybody's sake, down with the patriarchy. Because even in the, if you take it beyond sexuality, if you take it into racism, we're all benefiting from these paradigms being destroyed and taken down. And as soon as they are, then cheers to us all.
It does occur to me, having put it like that, Jason, that and what you were saying too, Heather, it makes me think that maybe solving the problematic badass female tropes might be a simpler solution than solving the toxic masculinity tropes.
Right.
Or at least it's a less complicated solution. Taking down the entire social structure that creates these toxic masculine tropes is a much bigger project than just, hey, let's have women write more comics and write more movies and direct more, That's not easy, and we can see that happening even now in 2019, but it's a lot easier than just down with the patriarchy. That's right. That's a much more long-term, complicated process. So what can we do in the meantime before the patriarchy crumbles and we burn the earth and all that kind of shit?
Because I think what gets to me before the earth crumbles,
before the world ends. So
that'll be next Tuesday. We don't have much time.
20 years, yeah, right. Next Tuesday.
Anyway, to get to because one of the questions I had, one of the things I asked myself in my notes, and this has to do with this, and I think we've talked about what's behind this note before, the fact that, when you are like me, the straight white male, you're at the top of the patriarchal structure.
And especially now that you have money. Oh.
But going down in a patriarchal structure, we understand why women, minorities, and stuff like this want to obtain the power at the top, because why wouldn't you? Right?
I don't know that that's really the case in a lot of
we're gonna stomp it down. Us white men are gonna stomp it down, but we respect the desire to gain power.
I don't think that's really the desire to gain power. I think it's the desire for equality. I don't think that these movements, I mean, there are certain people who are like, hey, I want to depose the king and then sit on his throne. And that's why feminism gets a bad name.
Right.
But I don't think that's what most of these movements are about. In fact, I think that's the opposite. They don't want to depose the men and then take their power. They want equality. They want everyone. They don't even want to necessarily take away men's power. They just want that. They want it all to be equal. Right. They don't want only white men to be able to have the power.
Right.
I think that's way different than what you're saying about trying to take over the kingship kind of thing.
I do. I understand that. I get that. What I'm saying is that from a rigidly patriarchal mindset, all this equality is pie, and there's a limited amount, and you all are coming for it.
Right. There's not that understanding on the top. Yeah.
So what I'm, when you're in that power position, anything that diminishes that spreads that power, that dilutes the concentration of power, because patriarchy is on gender, race, and wealth, and anything that diminishes, that was part of what makes patriarchy powerful, is that you have to have all three to be on the top.
I don't think that it diminishes the power either, though. It feels like that, though.
It feels like it when you have the market cornered and someone wants it.
You feel like you're being threatened. Yeah, right, exactly.
So my question was: are we running the risk of a kind of catch-22? A patriarchal society is already hyper-focused on men and men's issues. Are we providing patriarchy a way to ignore women's abuse? And this has to do with limiting the definition or misusing the term toxic masculinity.
Okay.
Way to ignore or diminish women's abuse by the patriarchal system in favor of focusing on itself. One of the things about patriarchy is that it permits males to be childishly self-centered and demand a maternal figure solve the problem. Right. So if we're not careful about how we define toxic masculinity, if we're loose as to what it does and who it affects, we end up with a situation where it's not a man's problem to solve. We don't have to do anything. We just need to wait for women to solve the problem.
Well, that's interesting. I never thought of that before.
So Chelsea Handler has this new special on Netflix called Hello Privilege. It's me, Chelsea. And I'm quick to make this comparison again, I guess, because I just watched this. But, she's talking to a group of minority people regarding race about her privilege as a white person. And the argument some of these participants in the audience had was, you making a documentary about your white privilege is white privilege. And you coming to us asking to fix the problem of racism is backwards. It's all great and fine and well that you want to include us in your conversations now, but y'all need to figure your own shit out, was kind of the thrust. So don't come to us for how to solve your white privilege problem. It's a white privilege to even ask us to help solve that. So I feel like, in a sense, everybody's got to come to terms with their own, fill in the blank. As a white woman and, us as white people and you as a white man, we all have this kind of, in anthropology, it was this idea of recognizing your bias. We've all got
recognizing your bias. Yeah, that's important.
And before any kind of field project, before any kind of research, really dive deep into yourself before you look outwardly. And going back to, you know, again, that anthropological education, I feel like a lot of this stems from just the basic enculturation of white men to be one thing. And then, you know, now society's saying, oh, wait, hold up. That's actually not how you're supposed to be. And it seems as though there is quite the identity crisis that's happening within that realm.
And that'll happen when something like that is sort of starting to be knocked down, and that there will be sort of an opposite pendulum swing, I think. I don't know that there's any way around that, but I also hesitate to talk too much about real life. I want to talk more about these pieces of art and entertainment and media, because by doing that, we can then reflect on how it affects real men and women and everyone. But I hesitate, just because I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a social worker, I'm not, you know, a philosopher. I don't really, what I do is I analyze literature and media, and we can reflect on what that does, because obviously literature and media is made from people in a culture, and it reflects the culture and also does the opposite. But I also don't want to be like, hi, I'm an anthropologist and I'm going to solve all of our literal societal problems. I'd rather talk about these tropes, and then we can sort of leave it up to the people noticing them after we talk about them and go, oh, okay, so here are some choices I can make that are different. Or at least here's how I can be aware that that is toxic. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Totally.
Okay.
And the one last thing I wanted to kind of, and like I said, I wanted to kind of lay like this general groundwork to understand that I think part of it was that I, compared to the problematic badass female tropes, I felt, and maybe it's just because you don't have the other ones fully written yet. I'm
written at all.
And we're going to be really winging it for the last three. And because this is such a touchy and fraught issue, maybe more so for me than it is for either of you right now, because I kind of have to walk out into the world, and this is I see it sometimes as a hammer. And I'll see if this little note, one of my last notes I'll share with us, and we'll get into go big or go home. But this was my little note. Women want men to be more emotionally open and honest about their feelings. Then men have an emotional response to a word like feminine, which is trained into them by the demands of patriarchy to react angrily to. We don't want to be accused of being girly.
Right.
But then we had that emotional reaction to be called girly, and then we get told that, you know, not to be so emotional. And it seems like a fundamental problem with the defended rigid male position. Any move outside of the box is dangerous from both angles. Stay in the box and you're under attack for being a patriarchal dinosaur. Step out of the box and you're under attack from the patriarchal dinosaurs you're trying to leave behind. And if you aren't perfect, and I think this is a unique problem right now in our technological online all the time society, more than it would be at any other time. But if you aren't perfect in this new and unfamiliar environment, you're under attack for still being a dinosaur from the people whose support you need in order to get out of that confined patriarchal box.
Yeah, if you make a mistake in this new way of being, then you get completely swarmed like piranhas.
Yeah, and it's something that I had some very personal experience with just in the last month. I made a mistake, and in a way I phrased a question to a woman, and it wasn't just, the response wasn't just that I did something wrong. It's that all of my attempts to understand, to break out of my patriarchal box then became seen as a lie and a falsehood. And this was, I was dishonest and I was toxic. And it's like,
right.
I misphrased one question And so, I just wanted to say that there for the straight white male and the straight white male patriarchy, I keep trying to step out of the box just because I think, one, I don't fit into the box, and I know I don't fit into the box, and I can't fit into the box. And at the same time, there are sometimes, like in all of these articles, the support articles that I read here, I see these guys stepping out of the box in certain ways, and I go, no, I'm not doing that. That's too soft.
Right. Well, that's what I mean by the pendulum swinging too far in the other direction, is like when you're trying to change an entire like way of a society like that, it is going to be pretty rough. It's not not everybody is completely enlightened and able to deal with, we don't really think only rationally or only with emotion. The two are mixed in this huge like Slurpee day at 7-Eleven sludge all the time. So yeah, and that's not fair how you were treated. That's not fair. But it's like there's kind of
but it's understandable. It's understandable because there's not it's painful too, but it's understandable in that person not only had that microcosm experience with me, they had an entire lifetime of experience of men treating her that way.
Sure.
Well,
exactly.
And I find it so reactionary, and that's where I've seen a lot of the problems occur where we have this backlash in regard to this subject, and it's reactionary. And I hate to put it like this. But this is actually how I've kind of felt personally when it comes to my own anxieties about similar scenarios. It's the wounded dog. You're suddenly very timid and quick to jump at any kind of movement around you because you've been so programmed to think in a certain way.
And that's natural. I mean, and like what Jason said, it's a reaction. It is reactionary. I don't think you're wrong in saying that. It is literally from not just a lifetime of a woman being abused, but it is generations of women being abused. Yep. And there's all that blood memory in there too. So yeah, it's going to get unfair, I think, a little bit.
Sure. And that social pendulum that you referred to, that was brought up by a teacher of mine at Wichita State. I took this fascinating class called Feminism and Hip Hop, and which was one of my faves. Honestly, it was one of my few women's studies courses, admittedly, but she explained it that same way, and it's always stuck with me, is that societal change has this pendulum effect before it finally balances itself out to some kind of neutrality. And that's what I kind of see here is a it's a gut feeling that you get when, you finally have the freedom to react when you haven't before. And I think sometimes even myself, you kind of tend to do that just kind of like hyper realization that, oh, this is a newfound freedom that I have. How do I use it? And I think there's going to be this balancing act when as we all find our footing, basically.
Right. And that woman is probably just like, no way, I thought you were one of the good ones. God damn it.
Right.
Like, that's probably how she felt, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is unfair, because you are one of the good ones. You made a mistake, and you're the kind of person who can be like, oh, sorry about that. Thank you for telling me.
Well, in the moment, I just kind of
do differently.
I mounted my defenses and built the wall in the moment. And then
of course,
wasn't
and that's
later.
What happens.
Right.
Because again, we are emotional things.
Right. And we still have somewhere inside us both the child we're trying to protect and the monster we created to protect that child.
Oh, that's a lovely way of putting it.
And that's from Mark Maron, by the way. But
love it. Thanks, Mark Maron.
So this brings us actually back to the trope and to one of the philosophical points that I've been harping on for like the last 20 years, which is, Zavad Karazhan's quote that the world is created in words first.
Yes.
Right? And so we recognize that we have this problem in our patriarchy.
We have known each other for 20 years?
Yeah. 1999.
God damn it. All right. No, that's fine. That's fine. Go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you with my decrepit
with your sudden realization of the concept of math? Is that...
No, the concept of time going by. Oh, damn it. Okay.
Okay, so, the world is written first, and everything that happens in it happens in language first. And this is my segue back into the trope, is that by identifying these toxic masculinity tropes that appear in media where it has an influence, these tropes wrote a world that we live in now.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
By identifying them and talking about them, we can break them down and hopefully get people that will write remedy tropes to these things, which then will write a new world. It'll make it easier for people like me to step out of the box, make it easier for guys who are in more traditionally masculine boxes to step out of it.
My friend to go figure out what bi means.
Right. And so here we are with our very first...
Like antibody tropes.
Right. And I think by discussing these tropes you've identified, we can begin the process. So we can extract the blood that's needed to build the antidote, right?
A whole new world. Okay.
Yes.
What is that from? The Little Mermaid?
No.
What is that from?
That's from Aladdin.
Oh, I'm getting my Disney movies.
Open your thighs. Oh, wait.
Oh, thighs?
Yeah, I have a whole pornographic version of it. As you do.
Of course you do.
Bring me back to the first trope.
So bring you back to the first trope. So here we are. Our first toxic masculinity trope. Do you want to define it, or shall I do it real quick?
Why don't you define it?
Okay, and see if I get it right.
I already have. I've written the article.
This is basically go big or go home. This is the trope that says that in order to be a man, to be a hero, to be a heroic male, you must be the largest, most physically dominant specimen in the room.
And that's your only choice for physical beauty.
Correct. To be large. And what this is kind of your trope that plays into and can create situations in men where they have body dysmorphia, they have eating disorders, they damage themselves by overexertion and steroid use and stuff like this in order to obtain this,
and even obesity.
Yeah, because it's if you are a big man, then you have to eat a certain way, and you eat a certain way to become a big man, and suddenly, you have a cholesterol over 400 and a BMI at 70 and you die of a heart attack at 40.
Yeah, and if you're small and or skinny, then you're a fucking faggot, right? Which is still a very, I hate using that phrase. It makes me ill, but that is still a very damaging, bullying phrase that's still used for men who are not as big as they can be, or big cut muscles, or they're called girly. Men in sports, like, hey, you throw like a girl. That still happens. So,
and you're
stuff like that.
Pointing this one mostly at the MCU.
Mostly because it's the easiest way to look at it, especially if you look at those like comic book movies in general. How the go big or go home thing has we've even gotten bigger and bigger and bigger with our heroes.
Right.
Also, when I look at the MCU universe, you can see very clearly how the heroes are always big and muscular, and the villains are the ones who are slender.
Have you guys read any of this criticism recently about the new Joker movie? How, essentially what we're doing here is redefining, like, hello, we've seen this trope before, but it's now playing out in Walmarts.
Oh,
and,
sure.
We've kind of had enough of this. Why are we glorifying this character in this film? Which I think is an interesting point.
I sort of talk about the oppressed, like, incel type in the second trope a little bit more. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's this unattainable ideal that you can't really get to, and it's the opposite for women. Women are told to get smaller and smaller and skinnier until we disappear, and men are told to take up more and more and more space. Both things are not really human and not realistic.
And yet we find in these kind of microcosmic ways that we've engendered even behaviors, like your article mentioned, the man-spreading. We've engendered, for that matter, we've engendered things like food. We've engendered, vegetarianism is not manly.
Oh, think about the phrase soy boy that's being used now.
Right, exactly.
I don't know how many times I've heard people make slightly derogatory comments at work because I prefer to eat a salad.
Right.
Oh, sure.
Than a burger and fries. There's a young man. He's married. He's got 2 kids. He's has a degree in some kind of engineering, and now mostly he's playing around with software on the team that I work on. And he is just a very kind of pasty white doughboy, but when we go down to have a team lunch, he's the one that's like getting the fries smothered in cheese with beef on it, and I don't see a vegetable anywhere near his plate. And he made some comment that he was glad he was done with the health program, the wellness program that the health company wanted to put him on, because he was overweight and had a health risk. Once he did the month-long, thing to get his weight down and complete the program, he was right back to, half pounds of macaroni and cheese with bacon, right? Because why?
That's manly stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's kind of, with this trope, there were a couple of different things that I noticed, and things that kind of, and one of them, because you focus so much on the Hulk. Yeah. It's not only his size that is important to the go big or go home, but it's the Hulk also carries with him that rage.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And the rage is big.
Bruce Banner is not the hero.
Right.
The Hulk is the hero. If Bruce Banner stayed Bruce Banner, he would not be a hero. He'd be like the mad scientist sidekick or whatever. But the Hulk is the one who is the hero. He has to become the Hulk. And like you said, he has to be big and angry in order to get there.
Right. Big physique, big emotion, big violence. Everything about the Hulk is big.
Yep.
We're introduced to a new Hulk in Endgame, where it's, spoiler, I don't know if you guys have seen it yet or not, but
I don't care about spoilers, so go ahead.
It's still Big Hulk, but he's got the mindset of Bruce.
Oh, okay.
So we've combined the best of both worlds, but have we? I mean, how conducive, really, except for taking selfies with fans in restaurants, which is what you see in the movie,
the way you said best of both worlds and then use the air quotes, that's absolutely true, because Bruce Banner can't just be the normal sized dude.
Right. Even though, come on, hello, Mark, hottie, and with that brain. But that's this old stereotype of this is what is, but it's not anymore. And I think that the Marvel Universe is kind of, where are they in that? I wonder so much as a fan, because honestly, Natalie Portman, or not Natalie Portman, but Black Widow.
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson, excuse me. Her character, I really needed them to develop. I really wanted that backstory. I wanted more of that. And then what do they do in Endgame? But,
kill her off.
They fridge her, kind of. I mean...
Is she going to get a solo movie soon, though?
I did see a Black Widow movie on the recent poster release thing.
It's going to be one of these, they're doing this mass production along with, Disney films. So a lot of these backstories that they're going to do prequel films for will, I guess, only be released on, this Disney streaming service or something like that.
Oh, okay, I see.
So there's a lot coming out. Some of it's going to be, major motion picture release kind of stuff. A lot of the other stuff. It's going to be one of these
blockbusters.
Like Hawkeye's getting a little movie, I guess, but it's going to be one of these streaming movies. And I think Black Widow's story is going to be the same. Loki's getting one too.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean, What I was pointing out too, look at the difference in those superhero movies from even since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then until today, like I think I wrote about two. I think I wrote about the Superman, like the difference between Christopher Reeve's Superman and then what's his face's Superman.
Oh yeah, if you even go back to the 30s and you go back to the original guy. Yeah. I mean, the guy that originally did Superman on TV had dad bod.
Right. Or I mean, you look at like Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk.
Right.
And then you have this other Hulk now that's like literally not a human. Mm-hmm. It's way too big to be a human. It has to be CGI.
Right.
So I'm not sure how that is great.
Right.
You know what I mean? And actually, me and my partner were just talking about bodybuilding and how now they have a new division for what they call classic. And because this is for the men, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's men and women. I don't remember. But because men are getting so insanely big with all the new technology in bodybuilding that
like
you
all the
can't
supplements
just
and
get
stuff.
built like Arnold Schwarzenegger was when he first entered those competitions. You can't. That's not enough anymore. So now they have a new division called Classic, where you can just be super insanely fit and amazing looking and then still compete. Because you can't have an amazing human body and compete. Mm-hmm. And that's not a trope from entertainment. Well, I mean, unless you call bodybuilding entertainment, but that's sort of that's one aspect.
It's entertaining to somebody.
Well, it's the sort of like that's the body modification thing, which is a direct reflection of culture and et cetera. So, you know, it certainly is influenced by something. And you know, now we have the technology to do stuff like draw in CGI a giant Hulk instead of just paint a bodybuilder green. You know, so I mean, but what does that say? That now we have the technology, we can build him.
Right.
But you know, excuse me.
That was my favorite show when I was a kid.
You can cut that, Heather. Now that we can, does that mean we should?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What are the costs? What's that line from Doctor Who? Do I have the right?
Oh, I was never a big Doctor Who fan.
Oh, that's right.
It's a shame.
This is one of your many flaws.
I dabbled.
It's fine.
I have so many flaws.
It's okay. It's all right.
So, okay. So we have this body type that
unattainable ideal, an unattainable ideal.
Right. But the interesting thing is, though, we talk about the difference, how, CGI has given us a legitimately unattainable physical type. And I would also argue that even our non-CGI enhanced superheroes are for the majority of people, an unattainable body type, an unattainable body image.
You
because
think about
these people
when a superhero is their normal human man, they're pretty normal. But then when they become the superhero, they're immediately bigger. Like even Iron Man, he puts on that suit and he's bigger. Spider-Man, when he becomes Spider-Man, he's a teenage kid. But then he suddenly has ripped muscles and is V-shaped. So any hero, you have to become bigger in order to be a hero. And I even bring up in the article, like, look at the more subtle examples than the superheroes, like the more subtle characters, like look at Bruce Willis in Moonlighting as compared to Bruce Willis in the Die Hard movies.
Right.
In Moonlighting, he's sort of a romantic lead, but he's not a hero type. In Die Hard, he's way more muscular, his muscles are way more cut, and his shirts are slashed enough that you see them. So what is this saying to society? It's saying, what does a hero mean? A hero is someone who fights the good fight.
Right.
Does that mean you can only do that if you're big and muscular? And the ones who are skinny or small have to be the villains or the anti-heroes?
Right.
What kind of message is that?
Yeah. No, it is a very destructive and self-defeating message. And out of all of these messages that this particular trope is giving, none of them are directed at women.
No, no,
this is all an internalized, body image self thing.
Yep. Yeah, this totally
now
is.
It does make it, now having a large body does make other of our tropes more possible.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when we get into things like Bond, in our third one, that makes his dominance possible, being big.
More possible. Oh, I see. Yep.
Right. His dominance, his superiority is more possible because of a size, of a body type ideal.
Sure.
When we get into the fourth one, the nerd and the neckbeard, that one there is only made possible because of its counterbalance of the jock.
Sure. Yeah,
right.
That's true. Yeah, the nerd is the skinny one and the neckbeard is the fat, like the gamer in the basement, like on South Park, right?
Right. But, the thing is that I would argue that, even though we have the new, in movies and in television, we have the new ability with CGI to create these super huge, unattainable male figures, but that really isn't the one we need to worry about, because that kind of represents the cartoonish aspect of it.
Right.
And
because they are called superheroes for a reason. They're superhuman.
But I think at times what we really need to watch out for, particularly in the body image department of what's represented, are those characters not necessarily superheroes, but who suddenly show up. Well, take, for instance, the new Rambo movie. What fucking 70-year-old looks like Sylvester Stallone does? And why does Sylvester Stallone at 70 look like he does in that movie? Well, because he has a personal trainer. He's got millions of dollars. He's got a dietitian. And
let's be honest, probably a little CGI too. Let's be totally honest.
But he's not Hulkified.
No, he's not Hulkified. No, he's not completely.
Right.
The contrast between him and a regular-sized man, quote unquote, is not that extreme like the Hulk. Mm-hmm. But it's still an unattainable ideal.
Right.
Like you're saying, it's still like no 70-year-old man is going to be looking like that. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And he, honestly, probably doesn't look like that either. It's in the way he's shot. It's in the way, like you said, he has his entire life is about that. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. But yeah. Or like the even subtler thing about the whole, like, make the actor into a heroic type character thing, like I was talking about. Like, like the Bruce Willis example. That's a way more subtle, but it's there, and it's giving you a very clear signal.
Yeah, even though Bruce Willis looks more physically imposing in Die Hard than he did in Moonlighting, when he gets older and becomes after Die Hard becomes an actual action movie, standard, he gets even more cut, even more
and bigger.
Balder.
Well, that too. There's a whole thing about cut men that are bald. Look at the Jason Stathams and the the Rocks and the Vin Diesels. Yeah,
but the interesting thing is though is that if you take a look at, let's apply this. Let's keep Go Big or Go Home in mind, and let's think about war movies. Mm-hmm. Right? In war movies, you have an assortment. We have good guys versus bad guys type of situation, and you cannot have in a war movie your villains, your bad guys, say the Germans, all be skinny, scrawny. They have to be frightening and intimidating, so they have to be as big or bigger than your heroes.
Not have to be. You have one of two things that tends to happen stereotypically with a war movie. One is the sort of Ivan Drago kind of syndrome, which is like you say, there are all these blonde giants who are terrifying. Or you have this kind of effeminizing of the villain, where the villain is thinner.
Oh, through like an accent or something like that, maybe?
An accent and just a physicality. Mm-hmm. Too. Like the villains are often sort of more swishy. They're thinner. They wear different clothing. They're maybe more fastidious. Whereas the, say, American soldiers are kind of more rough and tumble, and they get their sleeve ripped off and there's their bicep and that kind of thing. whereas the villain might be a little bit more sort of fastidious and in a suit
but still so bigger or stronger or...
But no, like less big, like skinny. There's two ways to go about that. One is that they're bigger and terrifying, and we're the scrappy Americans that take over anyway. But the other one is that sort of almost gay-presenting villain, which means that they're thin and then they have all these kind of habits. Oh, yeah, exactly. Loki versus Thor. They're both they're half-brothers, but yeah, exactly.
Right. But when you actually go into real world type of military, combat situations, I remember one time when I was very young, because I didn't grow up with as steeped in comic books as some of my friends, but I definitely was a sci-fi movie watcher, a sci-fi book reader, and had an idealized version given to me by society of what a soldier, a warrior, a heroic, character, type of man would be. And I remember looking through one of my history books about Vietnam, and I remember there being a picture of an American soldier, and he didn't have a shirt on. He was grimy. He was filthy. And I remember looking at it and thinking, that's my body type. Here's this person that's supposed to symbolize, at least within our culture, the heroic, American soldier fighting a good fight in a war not of his own making, that the politicians got him into. He's fighting this tricksy, tunnel digging, violent, enemy. The other. And he had my body type, which was like almost no upper body definition, just because I'm wiry. I don't have like that shelf of muscle that you see some guys have, like pectorals, where it's like, Jesus Christ, you're the reason that chickens are deformed because we expect that to be breast meat, right? And I'm pretty much a rail, and this is what that.
So chicken boobs, I think, has to be a contender for the title of this one.
Chicken boobs?
I'm going to put this out there, yeah. Go ahead. Or chicken pecs, and we can make jokes about that.
Or did you ever look at what was it? There was a blog that was going on for a while, and it actually came out with a book, Hot Chicks with Douchebags.
Oh, I've heard of the blog, but...
Yeah. And... they had a picture of one guy who they called McBooby or something like that. I don't remember the exact name, but he had one of these weird shirts where he was covered from like mid-arm up to his shoulder and from waist up to just below his pectoral muscles, and his pectoral muscles were bare in this shirt. And he had the flip. Weird. It was so fucking bizarre. And if I could find the picture, I'll send it to you sometime, but it's like, but no, there was this rigid, like hard, like shelf of muscle right here where the pectorals are. And it's like, I've never, ever, and will never, ever have that. I so desperately at one point, speaking of comic book superheroes and their real life, doppelganger human actors that I have a man crush on, Ryan Reynolds. I would love to have Ryan Reynolds' physique.
Well, I mean, even if you look at like...
And even he's got that weird shelf of like boob meat.
Well, if you look at like football players, American football players versus soccer players, but there's still an aspect of being unrealistically muscular.
Right.
I guess is what I'm trying to say.
But no, I just remember being shocked at that picture. Here was this wiry, thin, almost effete-looking guy, but he was an American soldier. He had the classic, American soldier helmet on. He had the rifle, he was dirty and grimy and smeared with stuff, and he was pointing off at the enemy like, we're going to go get him there. And it's like, so I don't have to... And it was... I think that was the moment when I realized, you don't have to beef up to be the hero. And in fact, it might not actually... be a good thing to be that fucking beefy, right?
Oh, it tends to be kind of bad for you for a lot of people. I think it's interesting, though, too. We can even talk, this is, again, getting way too much into society and stuff like that, but the fact that that's a picture from the Vietnam War as opposed to, say, World War II, where we were all like, dun, 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 we have saved you. We are the heroic Americans.
But you can find those pictures. You can find those pictures from World War II as well. You can find one from the Korean War. The one from the Korean War that kills me is there was an American GI whose best friend was just killed, and a medic is comforting this guy, and it's very much a maternal pose. He is holding the man's head against his chest. Wow. I don't know if you've ever seen this picture, and it's this very tender moment in the middle of combat where they're like, "Oh," he's like, "Yeah." The one man is just in intense pain and grieving, and this other man is cradling him almost like a mother, and.
So like a Madonna instead of a Pietà, right?
Right. And it's weird, because this is one thing I think that'll come up as we talk about these tropes again and again and again, is this is something you don't see in the tropes, is you do not see go big or go home and the Bond stuff or anything like that, or the nerd in the neck beard or grow a pair. And even we get into the later ones, which I've only read the paragraphs about, you do not see this weird thing that every single combat vet will tell you is true, is that in that moment when they are actually, their life is actually threatened by their environment, every single facet of the human emotional range is acceptable. For those men.
Can we talk about men and women in combat, though?
Yes, we can. Because you also have to deal with the fact that when you get into combat, you have, and women have been in combat in the last 30 to 40 years, you get into combat where women are intensely fierce. You have Tammy Duckworth, lost two legs. You have the woman who was fictionalized in that who she was played by Meg Ryan.
Right.
Right.
I forget her name.
And then, of course, history is littered. Laird Hunt, our cohort from previous Naropa years. His book Neverhome is entirely about a woman who pretends to be a man to go off to war, and she's heroic and valorous, and she's oftentimes more aggressive and violent and physically dominating than the men around her.
Sure, but I just mean, is that allowed for the women too?
What? The full range of...
Yeah.
Well, combat does weird things.
They're pretty objectified. They're pretty raped a lot and stuff like that. Although I've been reading a lot of pieces now about how men are raped a lot also in the military, so I don't really know what to say about that. But I'm just throwing that out there.
And I understand all of that is out there, but what I'm bringing that up is that, we have go big or go home. We have these toxic masculinity tropes, and it seems to me that one of the remedies for these things would be an honest representation of how the violence that these tropes tend to be swimming in brings out those sides of men that we generally want to repress.
Right.
Because when you take a look at the MCU...
And we'll talk about number 2.
Right. When you take a look at all of that stuff, all of these toxic... What they do is they say, no. All of the stuff you hear about men being gentle or compassionate, under duress...
They're not real men.
They're not real men. The only way to be heroic is to be bigger than everybody else and more dominant. The only way to be... and you don't...
And stoic.
Right. You don't see, like Captain America.
Well, that's what I think of when you talk about that, because he was the most heroic. He was he had the most valor, and he didn't have a place within World War II until he was big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But as a small character, he loved his best friend, Bucky, more than anything, and he had this love for Agent Carter, and he really, if anything, Captain America, he got to be one of the most large characters, second only to, or, you know, kind of to the Hulk, to Thor. You know, there's Captain America. But within him was a guy who, by the end of Endgame, you know, threw it all in to go find the love of his life and live a life of normalcy without all of the hoopla, because that's who Captain America is, you know, deep down.
It's interesting.
Do you think that part of the antidote, and this might be true for the badass female tropes too, do you think part of the way to, air quotes, correct these tropes or to undo them is to talk about stuff like that picture from the war, like real life? And not just real life of the incels shooting up Walmarts, but the real life of other people that haven't fallen under the prey of this toxicality and just like toxicness?
Toxicity.
I have an MFA in writing too. Yay.
What do you think about the attempts of the Marvel Universe, MCU, and Netflix to do these alt-hero series? I'm thinking of Jessica Jones, and I'm thinking of
I think that actually might be another step.
Superhero.
Yeah, I think that might be another step in the right direction too. Like, to have an entire movie of Wonder Woman was pretty, I mean, with all the problems that
despite all the problems that the Wonder Woman presented
as a trope. That was still a really big move in the right direction.
Right.
I think having a solo movie for each of the heroes and having more backstory and seeing them more as humans, I think that could be a really big step in the right, step in the right direction. Yeah. I don't think it's going to correct anything necessarily, but yeah, like you said, having an entire movie with Black Widow, we can actually see more of like who she is and what her background is, because all we get is a hint of it and makes her kind of a badass. So yeah, I think that making them more into humans and having them more on a human scale, I think is a big improvement.
Well, I think that's why they're two of my favorite superheroes have always been, and I know you pointed out Spider-Man before, is occasionally, you know, he's supposed to be a teenage boy, but suddenly he's got a V shape. But the thing is that, you know, the two best Spider-Man movies that I've seen have been the most recent ones with Tom Holland.
Right.
And yes, he does. When you put him in the skin-tight Spider-Man suit, he looks like he's got, you know, a bit of a physique. You take him out of that suit, and he's not physically that much different than me.
Right. But also he's a teenager too, so. Right.
He doesn't have the pudgy midsection that I do, and he's maybe got a little bit more pectoral definition than I do. But, you know, I would be surprised if he I don't know how tall he is. He's certainly, I don't know that he's 6'1", and he's probably not.
Everyone in Hollywood is shorter than you think they are.
I know everyone in Hollywood is way shorter, and I doubt he weighs 190 pounds. But, you know, the other Marvel superhero that I always kind of liked was Daredevil. And he was also one who was never really ever drawn with, you know, a massive body.
Well, and I think the other aspect of Daredevil was, you know, he wasn't the largest. There is the aspect of ableism that they're touching upon, and then his intelligence also comes into play. Sure. I think that he's a highly intelligent character. Right. And I think that these series are opening up a door. It almost seems as though they're kind of testing the waters to see, you know, how much money can we make if we were to actually turn one of these anti-hero heroes into a big screen production. Yeah. Let's test it out on Netflix and see how we do.
I hope they use the guy, because Marvel has a good track record of integrating their cinematic universe and their television universe.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would love to see the guy who plays Daredevil do a feature movie as Daredevil, because he would be so much better than Ben Affleck. Listen, I mean, I like Ben Affleck, whatever. I like him better as kind of the tall, dorky nerd guy than the action hero Ben Affleck. I like the action hero Ben Affleck is like this. The action hero Ben Affleck is this trope.
Yes, right.
Because
he has to be bigger.
Because Ben Affleck couldn't be an action hero with the body he had in Chasing Amy. He couldn't be the hero that he was even in the Dogma movies where he had bit parts, or the Clerks movies that he had bit parts in, or any of the other Kevin Smith stuff he did.
He was just always good at being himself as a bit part in a Kevin Smith movie. That's what he's good at doing. That's kind of his
right.
niche.
But when he tries to be an action hero, it's
disingenuous. We're not buying it.
And you see this guy who does not normally have this bulky, go big or go home physique, who has the money to pay for a personal trainer, suddenly become big and bulky, and you're like, no.
Yeah, and the costumes that he's put in and all that stuff too. Yeah. Everything has something to do with it as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now you got to. I guess that's the thing with all of these tropes, but especially with go big or go home, is because it forces these characters and these heroes into this box. You run the risk of having it be not only destructive as an unattainable body image, but dishonest in relation to the core personality of that actor or that character. And I think
dishonest is a good way. Yeah, if you look at even like the Photoshop being used on women in Instagram or like in supermodel spreads in Vogue, that's a dishonesty too.
Right.
It's the same kind of idea. Yeah, that's interesting. It's unattainable. It's also dishonest. And
I joined the Y, and I started paying a Y membership, and I told the guy that signed me up that I wanted to look like Ryan Reynolds. That was 7 years ago. It's not going to happen. And we have to come to terms with that. We have to realize that these images of masculinity as being incredibly large, incredibly powerful. Those are not always the best, the only, or the right way to be a man. It's like that.
It's not the only way of being beautiful.
Right.
As a man.
It's such a limited way to think about human beings anyway. I mean, because as women, I'm sure that, Jenn can understand where I'm coming from with this. It's the same. We were raised in an environment where actually being the heroine chic was the thing, and skinny, and this unobtainable unless you wanted to be sickly kind of body was what we were being inundated by. And jokes on us, we actually grew up to find out, well, that's not even, ironically enough, what men want, so to speak.
That too.
And it's so limiting to think that. And the same can be, I think, extended to this trope. Women, I'm not even attracted to the hyper masculine, and I never have been. And I've always thought, why is this put out there as if it's the thing?
Well, I mean, look at the whole craze in the late 80s with the second English invasion, with all the bands coming in from England who wore makeup and were skinny and wore very, like, their hair was very, very elaborate and almost feminized. And
Poison.
Well,
when their
Poison.
debut album cover, everybody thought they were girls.
Right, and Duran Duran had that same kind of, we used to call it androgynous back then. But they were, but they were like, they had hordes of screaming women lusting after. And look at Prince.
Oh, I so wanted to be Prince. I wanted to dance like Prince.
Right. I mean, that's completely opposite of this trope, right? He's little. He wears platform shoes.
He's lithe, and he's
lithe. I wouldn't say he's skinny, but he's definitely a small dude.
Yeah.
But, I mean, panties flew off all around this guy. Yeah. So, I mean, in real life,
even
some of the
panties.
icons of some entertainment actually flies directly in the face of this trope. So that's also interesting and cool. I want to talk a little bit about that type of androgyny when I talk about the number 5, I think it is. Uh-huh. The two-sided gay one.
Oh yeah, my gay best friend.
It's this kind of ambiguousness that's a very interesting thing, and it's when it's made toxic, it tends to be damaging to a lot of people. But there's this interesting sort of series of entertainments that fly in the face of that. So I want to talk about that later. But that's later. That's not right now. Anyway,
tonight was go big or go home, and we went big. We talked about a lot of stuff. I think we did.
I went big, and I'm already home. So there you go.
The only person who's not home right now is Heather.
Oh. Well, thanks for going.
No.
Well, thanks for going big. Now go home.
Yeah. Well, let me put this. Say good night.
Oh, good night.
The Outrider podcast is orchestrated by me, Jason Quinn Malott, and audio production magic is performed by Heather Ann Eden. You can find the show online at jquinmalott.com, and if you would, please hop on iTunes and give us a rating. We'll be back later in 2020 with more mini-series, live shows, and one-on-one conversations with writers, editors, and publishers. Thanks for listening.